Hello and welcome to Communicating Your Vision. I'm Daniel Thorpe, and it'll be my privilege to be your facilitator for this course. I'd like to start with a couple of questions. Do you consider yourself to be a good communicator? Be honest now. And do you consider yourself to be a good listener? Be really honest now. Now, about the people you work with. What percentage of them do you think are good listeners? When I ask this question in face-to-face courses, about 80% of the class tends to think they're good listeners. But when I ask them about their fellows, they rate it at about 20% of them being good listeners. So there's something going on here. And obviously, a lot of us who think we're good listeners, we're not rated as such by our co-workers. So, as I mentioned in the introductory discussion, I've spent the last 40 years, both as an Army officer and as a college CS administrator, leading and managing human beings. And in that time, I've found that communication skills, the ability to get your message across, to be clear, to motivate and inspire people, are just about the single most important skill that a leader can have. But it is a skill, and just because you're able to speak well doesn't mean that you're an effective communicator. And I really like this quotation by Dr. Howard Hendricks because I think it gets at a good part of the reason why so many of us aren't as good a communicator as we think we are. Thoughts untangle themselves over lips and through pencil tips. Because the communication process starts with a thought or with an idea in our head. We think of something and we want to share that idea. And the problem is, as long as the idea stays in your head, it really is more tangled than you realize. Your mind intuits the connections. Your mind puts things in order intuitively, and you think the thought is clear. But when you want to share that thought with another person, what you've got to do is put that thought into words. And that's not a one-to-one process. When the thought is in your head, it's a very vague, abstract, intuitive cloud of connections and ideas. And it is only when you try to translate that into words or encode it that you have to actually put all those intuitions, all those images and thoughts into words. And that's actually a it can be a fairly complex process. And you can think of this, if you've ever sat down to write a fairly important email and you think you know what you want to say, but then you sit down at the computer and to write the email and the words just don't come. Well, that's a good example of where the idea is clear in your head, but in fact, to actually encode it, to put it into words, you've got to untangle those thoughts. And so this is the first place where communication can start to erode. If we don't realize or appreciate just how important this encoding process is, and the fact that what's in your head is not in a form that you can transmit it. It's not in words. That's a translation process, an encoding process you have to go through. Then it's very easy to rush this or just blurt something out without thinking because we don't realize just how important this step in the communication process is. Once you've encoded your thoughts into words, you send it to another person in the form of a message, which goes over a channel. And channels are something we'll be talking about a fair bit in this course, because that will affect your message. By channel, I mean you could be talking face to face, You could be talking over the telephone, you could be sending an email. All of these things are channels that can carry your message. And this is another place where that communication process can erode. If you're speaking face to face, are you too far apart? Is it hard to hear the other person because there's a lot of noise in the room? Any physical barriers in the channel can erode the communication process, make it harder to get your message to another person. And of course, when your message arrives at the other person, the receiver, then they have to decode it, put it into something that they can understand. And just as encoding is more complex than we tend to think it is, decoding is actually a fairly involved process, because this person may have different language skills than you. The words that you've used may have a different meaning for them because they're older or younger than you. They're from a different culture than you. They're have English as a second language. All of these things can affect the way that they decode the message. And you've experienced how this can go wrong, because if you think back, I'm sure that everyone can remember where you said something to another person that you thought was perfectly clear, and then they answered back and you realized that they had got a completely different understanding. So that's where you've got errors in the decoding process. So hopefully, if the person isn't sure or of your message, or they don't understand part of it, or they still have questions from what you've told them, they will ask you a question back. And of course, they have to take that vagueness in their mind, that uncertainty in their thoughts, and they have to encode that into a feedback message that goes back to you. And what do you have to do with your feedback message? You have to decode it so you can understand what they're asking. And then the whole round of communication starts again. So as you can see, what we think of as just the simple process of talking to another human being, there's actually quite a lot going on here. And the process can break down at any one of these stages. Barriers to communication could include physical barriers, the person not being interested in your message, grandstanding, cultural barriers. But how you overcome those will be the topic for the next presentation. For now, I think the best takeaway you can take from this presentation is the awareness that communications, or communicating with another human being, is a fairly involved process, and it's something that requires your attention and your effort. If you're aware of just what's involved in the communication process, and because of that awareness, you make the effort to really encode your message well, to choose an appropriate channel, to overcome those physical barriers. Your awareness of just how much is going on, I think, is the best equipment for ensuring that the process works. So thank you for taking part in this course. If you have any questions, comments, cavils, cachinnations, you can put them in the discussion forum for Unit 1. I'll be checking that regularly. And for now, thank you and good luck with the course.